Okay, in this lesson we're going to add and subtract integers. So many teachers showed many different ways, number lines, keep, change, all different terminology. Here's 4 basic steps to solve these. If you memorize these steps, you'll solve this. I go away from the theory in a sense, but this makes it a lot easier to get the right answer. So let's take a look. First step, make sure there are only 2 signs. So if you notice, here I have -5 minus -3. This has two signs in between here. All right, I don't want 2 signs. Now I have. If you look at this, I have 1, 2, 3 signs. I don't want 3 signs. I only want 2. Okay, so what I want to do is I want to combine these 2 signs in the middle. I want to combine these 2 signs in the middle and combine these 2 signs in the middle here. All right, so the middle should only have 1 sign. All right, so think about when you're combining these 2 signs in the middle, we have to think about our multiplication rules. So when you multiply numbers, or when you multiply integers, if you multiply a negative times a negative, your answer is a positive. When you multiply a negative times a positive, your answer is a negative. And again, if you multiply a negative times a positive times a negative, your answer again is going to be a negative. And then the last one, the most basics, a positive times a positive, we all know is a positive. Okay, so there's a couple different ways to get your positives, 2 different ways to get positives, 2 different ways to get your negative. So positive times a positive is a positive, and negative times a negative is a positive, and negative times a positive is a negative, a positive times a negative is a negative. So if we look here, we're going to keep our -5, so we're going to have -5, and now what do these 2 signs become? So a negative times a negative, if we go here, negative times a negative is a positive plus 3. So now now my 1, 2, 3 signs now just became 1, 2 signs. Okay, so let's just get it down to 2 signs, and let's look at our next one. -5. Okay, now here I have positive and a negative. A positive times a negative. If we look at my chart, a positive times a negative is a negative, so this becomes -5 minus 5. And my last one here, keeping my -5 first, -5 and a negative times a positive becomes -3 again. Okay, so these 2 combine and make a negative. So that's my first step. Make sure you only have 2 signs. And I'll explain why in a second. Now that we only have 2 signs, each one of these signs belongs to the number. So this negative belongs to the 5. This negative belongs to the 5, and this negative belongs to the 5. So the sign to the left of the number belongs to that number. This is a +3. This is a -5. This is a -3. So these signs belong to that number. What that allows me to do is I could now change the order of these. So I could flip these and say, okay, I have +3 minus 5. Or I could say I have -5 minus 5, and nothing really changed there. Or I could say I have -3 minus 5. Okay, so I can reverse the order on these, but making sure that I keep that sign to the left with that number. Alright, so that's my first step. Make sure you only have 2 signs. Now that you have these 2 signs, okay, so let's take these. Let's take this example. -5 plus 3, -5 plus 3. We also had the example -5 minus 5 and -5 minus 3. -5 minus 5, and the last one we had was -5 again plus 3 and -5 minus 5. Okay. And let's make another one up. Let's say +3 minus 5. Where the +3, we really wouldn't see the positive sign written in the front here. So we're just going to say 3 minus 5. Alright, so when this is written this way, we have to remember that there is going to be a positive here in the front. So when adding and subtracting integers, there's one of 2 things we're going to do. We're either going to add these numbers or subtract these numbers. So let's decide, are we going to add them or subtract them? Well, if they have the same sign, Okay, if they have the same sign, we're going to add them. If they have different signs, I'm going to subtract them. So let's look at our first example here. -5 plus 3. I have a -5 and a +3. Are they the same sign? They're different signs, so if they're different signs, I'm going to subtract these two numbers. And we'll see how in a second. Okay? -5, our next example, -5 minus 5. Both these numbers have the same sign. They're both negative, so I'm going to add these numbers. And the last one, +3, and -5. Okay, see, both of these have different signs, so again, I'm going to subtract these numbers. Okay, let's look at the next step. And we'll put this all together in a second. So a good idea just to write these all down. The third step was we're going to arrange our numbers from least to greatest. So if we just take back these numbers here, and we'll copy paste this. Alright. So from least to greatest, okay? So I'm going to put these down vertically. So I have a -5 and a +3. Who is the bigger number? Well, 5 is the bigger number. So I'm just going to say 5 and 3. Like I'm going to add or subtract these. Now the last step we said if they had opposite signs, we're going to subtract. So we're going to put the bigger number, smaller number, and we're going to subtract these numbers. So if we do 5 minus 3, we get an answer of 2. Okay? There's our first example. That one goes here. Okay? Let's just spread these out. Okay, here, 5 and 5, they're both the same, so it doesn't matter which one I put here. So 5 and 5. They both have the same sign, so I'm going to add these two numbers. And our last example here was +3 and -5. So the 5 is bigger, the 3 is smaller. Again, these both have the different signs, so I'm going to subtract these. 5 minus 3, and I get 2. This was 5 plus 5, and I get 10. So now let's take these examples for a second here. Okay, let's take these again. And let's put these here. Okay, so now these are pretty much our answers, 10, 2, and 2. The last thing we have to consider is, are these the answers that I have, are the signs correct? Okay, are the signs of these answers correct? So this is where I want to take the sign from the bigger number. So let's look at here, -5 and -5. Which number is bigger, the 5 or the 5? Well, in this case it doesn't matter, right? Because they're both equal, 5 and 5. So what's the sign to the 5? Well, this sign is negative. What's the sign to this 5? This sign is negative. Since both numbers are the same, I'm going to take the negative sign. I have no choice. So -5 minus 5 is -10. Let's look at our next example. I have -5 and +3. 5 and 3. Who's the bigger number? Is 5 bigger or is 3 bigger? Well, in this case, the 5 is bigger. So is the sign of the 5 positive or negative? Well, the sign of this 5, it happens to be negative, so my answer is going to be -2. And let's look at our last one. We have +3 and -5. Is 3 bigger or is 5 bigger? Again, is the 3 bigger or is the 5 bigger? Here we see that the 5 is bigger, and since the 5 has the negative or the minus sign or negative sign, then my answer again is going to be negative. Okay, so let's put this all together. Ready? Let's try these out. -7 minus 8. First off, looking at my checklist here, I want two signs. Do I have two signs? Yeah, I have a negative and a negative. They're both the same signs. Okay. I want to add or subtract these two numbers. Am I going to add these two numbers or am I going to subtract these two numbers? Well, these numbers both have the same sign, so when they have the same sign, I'm going to add these numbers. Put the numbers in order from greatest to least, so I have 8 and 7. 8 plus 7 is 15. And then finally, is this a positive 15? Is this going to be a positive 15? Or is this going to be a negative 15? All right, so a positive 15 or a negative 15? Well, my last step says take the sign of the bigger number. Okay, well, who's bigger? Is the 7 bigger? Or is the 8 bigger? Is the 7 bigger or is the 8 bigger? Well, in this case, the 8 is bigger, so we're going to take the negative from the 8. Now, in this particular example, since they're both negative, it doesn't matter which one is bigger. We're going to take the negative sign either way. That's the only sign I can take. So my answer is negative 15. Next one. 2 signs. Do I have 2 signs? 1 and 2. Perfect. I have my 2 signs. So far, so good. Decide. Am I going to add or subtract these numbers? Am I going to add or subtract these numbers? Now, I did the last example vertically. It doesn't matter if you want to do them vertically, horizontally, whatever you want. So am I going to add or subtract these 2 numbers? Well, they have opposite signs or different signs. So if they have different signs, I'm going to take the difference, or I'm going to subtract. So I'm going to subtract these 2 numbers, put them in order from greatest to least. So 49 is bigger than 23. So now let's subtract 49 minus 23. So 9 minus 3, we got 6. 4 minus 2, we got 2. So my answer is 26. Now the last question becomes, is it a positive 26 or is it a negative 26? Well, again, let's take a look at this. Which number is bigger, the 23 or the 49? The 23 or the 49? Well, the 49 is bigger. What sign belongs to the 49? Well, the positive sign belongs to the 49, so my answer is going to be positive 26. Now, if it's positive, you don't have to write the positive. Your answer can just be simply 26. But at least you know what it's going to be, positive or negative. Let's take a look at another one. Negative 72 plus negative 103. Do I have 2 signs? No. Okay, so right here in the middle, I have 1, 2, 3 signs because I have 2 signs in the middle. I don't want these 2 signs. So this is going to be what? Negative 72, is it plus 103 or minus 103? Remember, when you have these two signs here, it's like you want to multiply this. So if you multiply a positive times a negative, what do you get? Well, if you multiply a positive times a negative, you get a negative. So this is going to be negative 72 minus 103. Okay? Second step, do I add or subtract? Well, this is negative 72. This is negative 103. Do they have the same sign or opposite signs? In this case, they have the same signs. So when they have the same signs, I'm going to add the 2 numbers. Put the numbers in order from greatest to least. So 103 plus 72. Add these 2 numbers together. We got 5, 7, and 1. 175. Now again, my sign. Is it a positive 175 or is it a negative 175? Well, look at the bigger number. Is 72 bigger or is 103 bigger? In this case, the 103 is bigger. What's the sign that belongs to the 103? It's negative. Even in this example again, since they're both negative, it doesn't matter which one's bigger or smaller because they both have a negative sign. So my answer is going to be negative 175. Okay, a few more. Negative 105 plus negative 72. Okay, so do they have the one sign? Here I actually have 2 signs in the middle. I want them to have 2 signs all together. So I have my negative 105 and 72. Do these 2 signs combine and make a what? Positive or a negative? Well, in this case, a multiplication, a positive times a negative becomes a negative. So this is negative 105 minus 72. Do I add or subtract these? Well, this is negative 105. This is negative 72. Do they have the same sign or opposite signs? They have the same sign, so I'm going to add these 2 numbers. And again, put my numbers in order from greatest to least. 7, 7, 1. They're both negative. The 105 is bigger. I'm going to take that negative sign, so it becomes negative 177. Okay, let's take a look at another one. 75 minus 89. Alright, so this one doesn't have a sign in the front. This one has a sign in the front. So I want two signs here. So mentally you have to think about this. If you have no sign here in the front, it doesn't tell you if the number is positive or negative. No sign there, we have to assume the number is going to be positive. Alright, so do I have two signs? Well, I have a positive sign, I have a negative sign. Yes, perfect. Do I add or subtract? Are they the same sign or they're different signs? Well, they're different signs. When they're different sign, I want to find the difference of these two numbers. So I'm going to subtract these two numbers. Put them in order from least to greatest, so 89 and 75. And do your subtraction here. 9 minus 5, I got 4. 8 minus 7, I got 1. So now the last question becomes, is it positive 14 or negative 14? Well, think about this again. Is the 75 bigger or is the 89 bigger? So I'm going to take the sign of the bigger number. Is the 75 bigger or is the 89 bigger? Well, 89 is bigger than 75, so I'm going to take the sign of the 89, which happens to be negative. So my answer is negative 14. Alright, one last quick example. And we're going to change this one up. So rather than having integers, we're going to have some rational numbers here. Now these work exactly the same way. You want to use the same exact rules. Okay? I want two signs. Again, there's three signs here. I have 1, 2, 3. I don't want that. I only want two signs. So I want negative 1 3/4 and add or subtract 2 4/5. Well, a negative times a negative is a positive. So negative 1 3/4 plus 4/5. Okay, so now I have my two signs. Am I going to add or subtract these two numbers? Well, one of the numbers is negative. The other number is positive. So I have different signs. What am I going to do with these numbers? I'm going to subtract different signs. I'm going to subtract these numbers. Okay, so I'm going to subtract these numbers. Put them in order from least to greatest. I'm sorry, from greatest to least. So I got 2 4/5 minus 1 3/4. Okay, so when we add or subtract fractions, we need a common denominator. My common denominator is going to be, we could take a shortcut. 5 times 4 is 20, so it's going to be 1 and something over 20. And this one, the number on top is going to be 2 and something over 20. Okay, and you can just find a common denominator easily by multiplying the two denominators. One strategy. Alright, so the question becomes 5 times what is 20? Well, this is going to be 5 times 4 is 20. So I have to multiply my numerator by 4. So this becomes 16 over 20. And then here, 4 times what is 20? Well, 4 times 5 is 20. 3 times what, or 3 times 5, multiplying both numerator and denominator by 5. And here I get 3 times 5 is 15. And I'm subtracting these two numbers. Keep your denominator, okay, so that doesn't change. So something over 20. Fractions first, or 16 minus 5, I get 1. And then your whole numbers, 2 minus 1, 1. So 1 and 1/20. And again, my final question to myself is this a positive 1 and 1/20 or a negative 1 and 1/20? Well, 1 3/4, 2 4/5. 1 3/4, 2 4/5. Who's the bigger number? Well, 2 is definitely bigger than 1, so 2 4/5 is bigger. The bigger number has a positive sign, so my answer is going to be positive 1 and 1/20.